7 years in Kenya was a Camelot time because we hit Kenya 10 years after independence, and there was a guy that was trying to
run for president.
Yeah,
J.M.
against
Kariuki,
Kenyatta.
is that the one?
Yes.
J.M. Kariuki.
And he said,
And everywhere in Nairobi when we got there in 1963, there were these 10 great years of independence. It was being celebrated. And then J.M. Kariuki came with 10 great years in which 10 million beggars have made 10 millionaires. And this kind of thing went sweeping.
He therefore was found dead.
Yes, and then he was found
before
dead.
the
And people
elections.
people
So it was very dangerous times. In fact, they did have the law, which they've just instituted now somewhere, that Thom told me, is that you could not meet with three or more people in Kenya without a permit. But we were later asked.
we
right,
were we were doing religious education.
That's what we were doing. And we were doing it with the Catholic Church, as well as with the Council of Churches in some ways. And it just, because that was a structure, it meant that we could get down to the grassroots, because you could train at one level there were over 3 million people that were reached in Kenya within those 7 years that we were there. And that was through women's groups, that was through literacy programs, that was through youth groups,
health groups,
cattle dip programs, which were all conscientizing
group
programs.
ranches for the Maasai.
It was because it linked to something practical in their lives, like the cattle dip or whatever. That you had to go through this kind of development program of participation.
And how long would those programs be?
Depended. The literacy program took 30, 40 times together.
Yes, but yes, the literacy program would be probably 4 or 5 months with those people. Then the training of trainers, we had first of all 4 one-week phases, and then afterwards another 1 week for everybody who'd ever done it before. And so then each year we had an extra, which was a very significant thing, that we kept the people together. And the fact of doing it through church structures meant that people were constantly supporting each other. And they were doing training across between dioceses and all that.
It's called bilateral
and
aid.
so it really built a sense of being part of a current that was really bringing about a major change. And that's why there was, it was so exciting and so people loved being in the workshops. They hadn't had that kind of opportunity to just say what they thought and talk, and really the intellectual stimulation was something that they just absolutely loved at that point.
And they would do anything to be in it.
Anything.
Anything. It was volunteer.
Yes. I mean,
total volunteer.
All the staffing was done freely, volunteered, and a lot of teachers working in their holidays and things like that, or people taking unpaid leave in order to be on the staff. And always we had more people applying for all the workshops than we could take. It was always limited numbers. No, you can only send 4, you can't send 5. All that to any group that wanted to send people.
And it had to be half women.
We told them it had to be half women, and we didn't always get that.
Yeah.
So what kept you going is the sheer energy of it. And
the sheer
joy
energy of it. And the response. I mean, there's nothing quite so wonderful as feeling you're needed and people want you there. So
what about the underlying principles?
Oh, they help too.
I want to say something, that I do think that Anne and I are very different from each other, and we also never trained by ourselves. There were also 2 or 3 other people, or 4.
One of the major forms of training was we would have 2 of us, 2 who were fairly experienced and 2 new people every time to do the training.
So there were 6 of us in the training team.
So we were constantly building the core of training people. But also the key principles. I mean, frankly, I think that we were drawing from very, very good sources all the time, in terms of Paulo Freire himself, those key principles of Paulo Freire, and then all the different things that we added, when we added Manfred Max Neef, when we added, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, many things that really touch very deeply into the actual roots of human experience. And so I think that's why I really do think that that's what keeps the books going. That they're dealing with really, really important things in human life and important insights into what motivates people, what discourages people, all that kind of stuff.
I also think that the teamwork and respect that Anne and I had for each other
Yes, it made
you
a
know,
big
that
difference.
did make a difference. You know, we would argue like crazy. I mean, in the trainers meeting to say, what are we going to do tomorrow? We would fight like crazy, but that it was a healthy fight.
And there was
usually.
a certain sense that, yeah, that we quickly got a core of people who were, you know, very close together, and so it became a community. And really, the workshops were constantly extending that sense of belonging to a community that was involved together.
Yeah.
The spirituality?
Very important. Very important. More than we had expected it to be honest. I think we went at a stage where we were a little bit fed up with the church and all that when we went to Kenya. I think partly from the Swaziland experience, because apart from that one bishop, we found the church very, very traditional and conservative there. I can remember the one we had on David and Goliath, and I can remember a lot of the different ones we had. And Kenyans are profoundly spiritual people. Their whole understanding of life, basically, is very spiritual, I think. And so I think that was very
And we had
important.
often a great because the Kenyans themselves said they wanted a priest in every one of their teams when they came together, because they held the power in the area or whatever. And so we got kind of usually the more progressive priests there, and they would become very good friends. And there was usually one or two or three different kind of missionary groups, Kiltegan or
the Irish and the Italians mainly.
Yeah. And but I remember that in one of them there's that lovely ecclesiastical reading of "It's a time for this and a time for that," and
Yes.
and the Kenyan was reading it, and he said,
We've just been doing things about feedback, you remember,
feedback
about
to
when you
each
should
other.
give feedback and how you should
And so
give
he
feedback
read,
and all this.
"There's a time to embarrass and a time to
To
refrain
refrain
from
from
embarrassing
embarrassing."
rather than embracing." And about 5 of the priests and Anne and I all, we were praying away.
Yes. Isn't that a perfect reaction to feedback?
And we
A
were,
time
and
to
they were
embarrass.
right.
A time
There's
to
a time
embarrass
to
and a time
embarrass
to
and
refrain from embarrassing.
Wonderful.
So
All
that's
right.
the kind of
But I think the
spirituality we had.
spirituality, I mean, there was a very, very deep sense that that this is what Christianity is about. This is what crucifixion and resurrection is about. This is what the whole thing of liberation. That it's the core of Christianity. It's to build a world of justice
When
and
did
peace.
meddling happen?
Meddling happened.
75, 76. It was coming out while we were in Kenya.
Yes, and then
And
the
that
Pueblo
fed a
document
lot.
afterwards. So, I mean, you had this very radical church in Brazil, part of the church in Brazil, I would say, but then all the bishops passing that Medellin document was really quite amazing. And that's totally for liberation theology.
But
So
then,
liberation theology was very important, because then we started reading people like Leonardo Boff and all those people. Who all are they? I have to start thinking. John Sobrino, Gutierrez, of course.
Gutierrez.
Yes. No, we
I'm
read
just
a lot
reading
of
this
that.
thing about the Pope.
Oh, yes.
But then, what we started to do, what Anne started to do, was reading other kinds of black theology was coming out of the
Yes,
States.
black
with
theology.
John
James Cone.
James Cone.
Yeah, so a lot of black
and then
theology.
feminist theology came later, and when we went back to the States in 1980,
Yes.
we joined up with a lot of strong feminists,
Yes.
and they excused us for our lack of feminist consciousness.
Consciousness,
because
yes.
way
We were
at that
rather
time.
behind, because
Yeah.
we've been in Phil.
They
Kenya all
allowed us
that
to
time.
come to be with them.
No,
So we had
got
a
some
quick
very
catch
good
up.
friends there. Yes, they caught us up quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
caught us with our.
But I think,
Saxon.
it was that constant inspiration that the message of the gospel first had so much to do with justice, it had so much to do with liberation, so much to do with the fairness for women, it had so much to do with ecological awareness and practice and so on. The sense that it was relevant all the way along was very, very important.
I also think that it's holistic, and we were very keen on that transformation is not just about society, because this is where you have the trade union stuff that I think is really difficult. Is the whole line is myself, then the face-to-face community, then then the bigger one is the organization, then you have the society, then you have the cosmos
institutions of society, yes.
Yeah.
That thing, that the whole one, that's always a thing that the training for transformation people now hit onto, which they absolutely love, that sense of the interconnectedness of all these things, and that for any process of liberation you've got to work at all of them. You can't do just the individual or just the small group or just the institution or just the political level. You've always got to work at transformation on every base, every level.
And that's where, like for me, the trade unions fall short, is because they'll do a lot of society stuff. Will they look at their own institution? Will they look at their own
interpersonal
relationships, et cetera, et cetera?